right? So integrity is really big. And that's why I say it's easier to just be yourself from the jump so you don't have to keep up this charade of who you think you have to be. Because at the end of the day, they're going to figure it out. And then it's hard to build trust.
Hello, agentpreneurs, and welcome back to the Daily List Report. Happy 2021. Couldn't be more excited to start off this fresh new year with, well, I'll be honest, I'm playing favorites. My favorite guest, Kamille Rose, is back on the show today. This is like her 4th or 40th episode with us. I don't know, but it's awesome and it's great stuff. And this is going to be really great content to kick off the new year. Let's cover a little bit of her ground first. So I got up on the screen right now her website, which is theultimatelife.com, L-Y-F-E. All the links are below. Definitely check her out there. And of course, give her a follow on Instagram at The Ultimate Life and as well on YouTube. Lots of great content there. All of this good, amazing, wonderful stuff. So what we've been doing with Kamille is going through a bit of a series. And so she was on end of last year and we talked about commitment to leadership. That was her first episode with us. And we talked about, keys to success, peak performance through gratitude, perspective, right, and choice, and all of this amazing stuff. Today, we're going to continue this series and we're going to be talking about masterful communication, something so important. We're going to have her define that. So without further ado, let's bring Kamille back on the show. Kamille, welcome back to the Daily List Report.
Hey, Randy. Hello, List Report folks. Thank you so much for being here, agentpreneurs. I'm excited for this new year and everything we're going to talk about today.
Indeed, Kamille. So why don't we start here? It is a new year and I can't think of a better person to ask. What does this mean? What does this mean? This is our first Monday of the week. Let's talk a little bit about that. What's your perspective on 2021?
What was interesting is everybody I felt began 2020 as a year of 2020 vision, getting clarity. This is going to be the year that I'm going to get really, really clear. And, obviously with everything that happened around the world and even here locally in the United States, folks felt like that idea flew out the window. But I would argue that we actually got exactly what we thought we were going to get, which is vision often, and clarity is hindsight, right? 2020 is hindsight. And I felt like 2020 was a big year for us to remove the veil of the systems and the processes and the ways that really were not working for us. Our healthcare system got really challenged and we realized that maybe we really weren't ready to handle a pandemic. We had racial divides here in the United States, and then that triggered conversations around the world. And obviously, we still had this conversation lurking beneath the surface of all our relationships. We didn't know how politically divided our country was until obviously this big election, or maybe we did, and we were just not having conversations about it. Businesses were really forced, especially maybe even entrepreneurs, agentpreneurs, to look at, is this the only way to do real estate, or do I need to start getting better at video and virtual tours, and what other tech can I be using? Is work from home possible, or do we have to meet in physical buildings? People who had brick and mortar are now going into virtual spaces. Restaurants are going into delivery. So all of these things, in a way, has forced us to become very innovative. And so we were just talking right before we recorded that 2020 to me really was the year of the undoing. Maybe undoing some of our old patterns, places where we spent money, time, and energy that were no longer serving us. And this year, we get to rebuild some of that foundation again. Maybe we did realize that spending time with our kids was essential. We haven't spent as much time with our kids as we had now. And I know for some parents are like, this is too much time with my kids. Yes. But I think that for some clients of mine who I've spoken to, they said that their kids are so grateful for all the time they get to spend with their parents. And they didn't realize how little time they were actually spending with their kids. Same thing with marriages and people talking about going back to basics. Like, hey, I'm happy just being at home, maybe having a low-key New Year's Eve celebration or Christmas celebration was actually quite nice. People have never Zoom chatted with their family before once a month to check in. And that was like a thing now. So I think a lot of good can come of it. It just always depends on perspective, which goes back to our very first conversation.
It absolutely does, Kamille. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that so much. And I do, right? I look back on 2020 and I see so much good that came out of it for myself and for a lot of people around me in some of the ways that you mentioned, right? The ways that we connected with friends and family were different.
Yeah.
my kids are a little bit older, and so I don't have to do their homework with them every day, but I get to see them so much more than I did before. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to do that. And I've seen people on my team move to places that they've always wanted to go, but never thought they could, because they thought they had to come to an office every day. And so, in spite of a lot of the challenges that people are facing, there were some good things that came out of it. And so, I'm optimistic and excited for this year. So,
Yeah.
why don't we segue a little bit into kind of our topic for today, which is masterful communication. And I think, in light of everything that we just talked about, what's interesting about that question is that communication has changed a little bit, hasn't it? Right? We talked about Zoom, and it's such an interesting thing. I had a conversation with a gentleman, a friend's company recently, and I'd never spoken to him before. He was like a board member or something. He was just helping him out. And he said to me, I don't like complimenting myself, but he was paying me a compliment, right? And he was just like, even though we're not in person, somehow you're building rapport with me, right? It's like we're together, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess my point is, like, it's an interesting channel and a medium for communication that has given us more opportunities than ever to talk to people. Yeah. But it's different, and you can't share a cocktail or a soda or a meal, right? It's so different. So let's first talk about masterful communication. I'd love to hear your perspective on maybe how some of that changes or doesn't change in light of how we're communicating today.
Absolutely. That's a great question, because I think one of the reasons that maybe that gentleman said you're so good at building rapport, and I totally agree. I think from the very first time that we had a conversation, I was like, oh, this is a guy like I want to go hang out with. Like, this is a dude I want to go have lunch with, have a glass of wine with or beer with, whatever. And when I reflect back on why that is, yes, you're absolutely fun and charming, and you obviously know what you're doing. You're very professional at it. But I think the key there is you're very authentic. Mm-hmm. And I think authenticity is what's most important, because when you say building rapport, it's just another way of saying building trust. Right. And I think at the end of the day, we as humans are fairly intuitive. It's built into our primal system that we're gauging whether or not we can trust this person. And yes, there might be some biases there. Maybe how someone's dressed, we might judge according to that, or what kind of car they drive, or maybe some words they say. But I think even deeper than that, there's a sense of, I think I can trust this person. Mm-hmm. And I think the way that we build that is just being really authentic. Often we'll talk about imposter syndrome. When I was talking to you and your team recently, we talked about that. This idea of, well, who am I to be in these shoes? I'm a new agent, and I don't know if I can sell this $1 million house. I've never sold $1 million house before. I feel like an imposter. And then we often change who we are. Then it no longer feels authentic. It's kind of weird. It's almost like you're flexing or you're trying to show off in a way that you don't need to. You don't need to cover up about it. But the people who are really honest, and it's like, you know what, this isn't something I'm particularly good at, but I'm willing to learn, right? That vulnerability, that authenticity is often where people can build rapport really easily. So I would say that's number one with masterful communication is be you. Don't try to be anybody else, because then that just adds another layer of nervousness, discomfort, and then dishonesty to the relationship. And that's where people get weary and they wonder, well, I said all the right things. I followed all the scripts from all the trainings and the coachings. How come it didn't work? And often it's in the delivery. Yeah. So yeah, you can say the right things, but if it's also not delivered in a great way, meaning your authentic self, then often there's a disconnect with the person receiving the communication from you. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And it actually just made me think of sort of a minor tangent, so bear with me. It made me think of something, which is communicating on Zoom as opposed to in person when you're meeting a potential partner or whatever is kind of, I think it's more of a meritocracy. And what I mean by that is you mentioned yourself, right? I didn't get to see what car you drove up to lunch in. I don't get to see that you're 4'5" or 6'5". I mean, maybe you can kind of tell that's too big of a difference, but you know what I mean, right? Yeah. I'm wearing sweatpants, beneath this black t-shirt, right? Like, that's the honest truth. That's what I'm doing, right? And so, like, there's so many things that we shed that form an impression when we meet somebody that oftentimes create blind spots and biases that impact that. So I don't know that I have a point here. It's just an interesting observation that in this world, when we hop on Zoom together, you could have a virtual background and you could be living in a terrible place because you've fallen on
Mhm.
hard times. And I would never know the difference, right? You just get to be who you are. And I think there's something really magical and powerful about that.
Oh, absolutely. Like right now, I am barefoot on a yoga block as we're talking, where normally I probably would be in heels, which, I enjoy wearing too. But if I were to pick one or the other, I really enjoy barefoot on a yoga block right
Yes.
now. And
Yes.
so that adds to my comfort level. I think it adds to the authenticity of the conversation. And then you really get to focus, I think, on the content, right? As you mentioned, is this person really know what they're talking about? Are they really going to be able to bring me value? Which
Yeah.
I would add as a second thing to masterful communication, especially when you're developing relationships with someone, is, and you may have heard this before, be more interested than interesting. And really, I think what you do well, Randy, is, and as a podcast interviewee, I have felt very comfortable because you are so engaged, so interested in what I have to say. You ask good follow up questions. You try to sync it to something in your life. So I can tell that you're really here. You're really interested
Yeah.
in what we're discussing. And you're not just, okay, I got to get to the next question. I got to get to the next. And often that's what I see maybe agentpreneurs do or other business folks. They're so focused on like, okay, we just got to get to the order of business, but they don't spend the time being interested in the client, being interested in the person. And you'd be surprised how many times folks do not get asked, oh, how are you today? Or that's interesting. Why do you think that? People don't always have an opportunity to express their opinion in a safe space. So if you get to be that person, you are such a winner in their eyes. Some of the greatest conversations I've ever had was when I didn't say anything. Like people were
Yes.
like, "Oh, you're such a great conversationalist." And if you really analyze that entire conversation, all I did was listen and ask questions. And so I wasn't the great conversationalist. They really were, but they felt that they were heard
Yeah.
or that they got to speak. So,
It makes perfect sense. Just as we recap as we go here, right? Number one was just to be you, right? Just be yourself. And it's something that I've talked about since day one on this show, right? Is that authenticity.
mhm.
And two, you talked about, I like this, be more interested than interesting. And so, if I combine those two things, right, I think about genuine curiosity. And I think a lot of people that I see make mistakes are not genuinely curious. And I think where I've found any level of success in this is I'm just genuinely curious. Like I also want to know. And there's a self-serving aspect of that, but it's genuine, so it's okay, right? And I give others a chance to sort of talk about, all of these really important, amazing things. So
Mhm.
I like that. Is there another point, a third one? Because I have a follow-up question if not, but I don't want to derail you, Kamille.
No, no, please go ahead.
So, when we think about these conversations, right, and everybody watching right now, right, you have tons of these, your current customers, your past customers, potential future customers, partners, whatever, all of these things.
Mhm.
Like, what are the, we already talked about the keys, so being you. I'm not being articulate now, right?
Mhm.
But why is this so important? In other words, why not just be transactional, right? Hey, this is business, right? Here's what I do. You need my service. Here's how much it costs. Let's go. Like, why is having a meaningful conversation such an important thing?
Well, I would say that especially in the beginning of the relationship, it is, right? Maybe you've gotten to a point with this particular client where it can be more transactional. It's like you've built that rapport, you know each other really well. There's that trust. Again, rapport is really building trust and connection. And then you can go into more transactional, right? Maybe that next phone call is, hey, we got to sign this thing, blah, 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 blah. You don't have to talk about their vacation for 30 minutes. But until you've laid that groundwork, I don't think you get the privilege or the right to just jump into transaction. Again, unless maybe that client is really like that. And the reason is it's very simple. People do business with those that they know, like, and trust, right? You've heard that before. And so, in order for them to know you, you need to meet with them, you need to market with them, you need to be top of mind. In order for them to like you, well, then that's when you have to be interested in them. Typically, people are just like you because you're genuinely interested in them. You're not always showing yourself off. And trust you then comes from the consistency. Are you always like this? Are you always being yourself? Or was this just a show at the beginning of our relationship, but then you're not like this
Right.
all the time, right? So integrity is really big, and that's why I say it's easier to just be yourself from the jump, so you don't have to keep up this charade of who you think you have to be. Because at the end of the day, they're going to figure it out, and then it's hard to build trust from there. So I think for sustained business, the longevity of an agentpreneur's mindset should be okay, know, like, and trust me. How do I build those three things with everybody that I work with? And that's why I think it's important to have meaningful conversations. And remember, as agents, you're in a relational business. You're not in a transactional business. Yes, you do transactions, but you're working with people. I think that agents, people in real estate, have one of the hardest sales jobs of all the types of sales because your product can change, right? The house changes, the neighborhood, all of that. And your client changes all the time. You're not just trading iPhone cases for iPhones and selling
Yeah.
widgets. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you're dealing with all the emotions that come with a client. Often you are real estate agent and a therapist to a lot of them, right?
Yes,
They,
absolutely.
they're dealing with their life savings, the amount of money they've been saving for 10 years. They're in the middle of a divorce right now, and they're trying to move out of the house. Their kids are driving them crazy. The moving process is already very difficult. They've had a family member that's passed away. That's why they have to sell. So you, by choosing to be in this industry, you have chosen to be in a relational sales industry. So meaningful conversations has to come with this because you're dealing with a very meaningful transaction. Again, if you are looking with first-time home buyers, consumer buyers, maybe investor relationships are a little bit different. Maybe commercial real estate is a little bit different. But I would
Right.
still argue building a strong relationship with those investors and those commercial investors is still very important
Yeah.
because I need to trust you. So
100% agreed, Camille. I mean, it is almost no matter what business you're in, there is an aspect of it that is relational, that is a people business, right? And
mhm.
that's just true, right? You look at my nephew for way back in the day was like the top salesperson in some like, I don't know, phone service, T-Mobile store or whatever, right? And it was because he was just so engaging and people trusted him, right? And even though he was selling a commodity service, a phone plan, right? There are ways to excel if you do that. Camille, I want to switch a little bit here and I want to ask you a question, which is when we have conversations, right? Most of the time, not all of the time. If you're just catching up with friends, it might be more open-ended. But in the context of business and what we're talking about here, you're going into the conversation typically with an area of focus or a goal in mind, right? I'm meeting a potential client for the first time, and yes, I want to be authentic, and yes, I want to be genuinely curious, but at the end of the day, I also want their business, right? And so when you think about sort of addressing your individual focus going into a conversation, how should our agents do that? And let's just take a practical example if we could, right? So I'm an agent, maybe I'm a new agent, and I've got a listing presentation. I know what I want to get out of that. And I've seen agents make the mistake of being so focused on what they want out of it that they forego some of the things that we already talked about, right? But how do they focus? How do they address that focus and that right mindset going in, knowing what they hope to get out of it? Or is that a mistake?
That's a good question. So, I think one of the greatest, well, I should say this, a personal sales philosophy that I align with is if you've ever read Bob Burg's The Go-Giver Sells More. And I think that Bob Burg does a very good job of explaining the sales process, the sales conversation from a very giving place. So he's what they call the go-giver, not the go-getter. So you avoid the commission breath, the thing that it's like the sleazy sort of snake oil talk where it's like you're trying to manipulate the conversation. But it's really about genuine informational conversations with people on what it is that they need. So yes, you should go into the conversation knowing that your purpose is to be able to represent them and the sale of their house or the purchase of a new home because you are the best person for that job for them because you know you're going to serve them at a high level. You also have to believe in your product. So that's another thing is if you're also not confident in the value you bring, that will filter into the conversation. But for me, yes, the purpose is that I want to serve you if I am the right person to serve you. So this presentation or this conversation, this discovery session, if you will, is to find out what it is that you need. And so that's why it's important for salespeople to really listen to what it is that they want and not to assume that they want for you to take a commission cut or they want you to stage the home, or that they want you to do this. We might sometimes assume their wants, desires, and needs.
Yeah.
But until you ask and really listen, some people might tell you, like, honestly, I just want a really smooth transaction, or I want the highest possible offer. I don't care how long it takes. And that's what you need to listen to. Because when you can ask those questions, it's like, well, what is it that you really want at the end of the day? If you could have the absolute, perfect transaction, what would that look like for you? And really listen, because they might be telling you, like, oh, I've actually always wanted my kid to learn about the real estate process. And it's like, oh, okay, then you might offer value in that way. It's like, all right, how about every time we do an open house, your kid can come and see how I make my flyers? Like, you just don't know the interesting requests that people might have. And so if you could be that person to meet the need, right, fill the gap from where they are to where they want to go, or what it is that they want, then you're the winner, right? But you have to figure out what that need is first. So that's why I think it's really important to have that meaningful conversation, ask the questions, find out what is it exactly that they desire, because you really don't know. You can make assumptions, but my mom used to say this, and pardon my French, you never want to assume, because then it makes an ass out of you and me. so
Absolutely.
so don't do it. And it would be arrogant of me to ever just also assume what a client needs and wants, because everyone is so unique and different. And so that's why the meaningful conversation is important. Know that, hey, I am the best person to serve you, but let's figure out first what your wants, needs, and desires are, and let's see how I can meet that. And to be honest, there might be situations where you really are not the right person. Maybe that client really wants to work with an agent who's going to only take this percentage of commission. And for you, that's a no-no. It's like, well, no, I know the value that I bring. This is what I charge. And so sometimes you will have to say no to a client to also build integrity in your business. That's not always easy, but I've also seen very successful agents who are very firm on their particular type of value and what they bring, and they won't work with certain types of clients too. So that's important as well.
I think that right there, what you said, for any new agent watching, or someone who hasn't learned that lesson, that is the mistake that I see made time and time again. And it is a function of the way that you're compensated in this business, which is you eat what you kill, right, as they say.
Yeah.
And so, you're sitting there and you don't have a transaction. You get an opportunity to go to a listing presentation and you're like, I'm going to do anything I can, right, to take this deal. And we've had episode after episode with top producer after top producer say that is the worst thing that you can do, that you have to understand where your value is, where your focus should be, and you have to stick to that, as difficult as that is. And I know that's really hard because this is your livelihood and there's money at stake there. But it is absolutely the key to your longevity in this industry to do that. Kamille, the advice that you just gave there, right? This idea of sort of focus and kind of going into a conversation, it makes me think a little bit about tough conversations, right? And so we're often, hopefully not always, in situations where we have to have a difficult conversation with somebody. And man, there are people in my life who can have those, and there are people who absolutely cannot have those. So when we think about this topic of masterful communication, how does it apply to the difficult conversations, the ones that none of us enjoy having but need to be had?
Yeah, so crucial conversations or difficult conversations are if you can master that skill, you're going to have incredible relationships. And I say this because studies have shown that the amount of time that passes between let's say, an event that was not good, and then the time in which the conversation about the event happened, that there's actual direct correlation to that time frame with the health of a relationship. So what that means is, let's say something happens between you and your spouse, or you and your client, and a lot of time passes before the actual conversation about that event occurs, then there's a decline in the health of that relationship. And then for those situations where an event happens and then we have the conversation almost immediately, the shorter the time frame, the better the health of the relationship. When you think about it, it makes sense, right? If you've ever been in a friendship or relationship with somebody and you haven't talked about it for years, you're like, that relationship always kind of felt a little awkward because there was something there we never discussed. And often we avoid it because it's awkward and it's weird and I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, or vice versa. So There's a book I actually recommend. It's this one. I don't know if you could see
Oh,
it here.
you have it right there. Okay.
Yep. So it's called Crucial Conversation Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High. There are multiple authors here. They are authorities in organizational effectiveness, and they deal with Fortune 500 companies all the time. But they did an academic study on the science behind crucial conversations. What is a crucial conversation? How to have it. And I don't exactly remember what chapter, but there is something here called the crucial conversation statement. And what it looks like when you need to address somebody about a particular thing kind of goes like this. It's like, hey, I know that we've been having, and then you kind of insert whatever the issue is there. I know we've been having some difficulty coming to an agreement on this particular commission rate. Really, this is what I would like to see happen. And then you insert your particular desire, right? But I do understand that maybe you have a concern of, and then you insert the other side's point of view. And then finally say, but at the end of the day, what I want is for both of us to, and then your end result, win, be happy, come together again. So I wanted to get your thoughts on this. And so that sort of template is very important because you're saying things in a very succinct way without raising arguments or why the other person is wrong. So you're giving what the situation is, what your personal desire is. So you're always saying, I feel or I would like. But I understand that and then you want to be able to present what they might be concerned about. And then you want to say, but at the end of the day, what I would like for us is this. So your desire, your end result is maybe that you're both happy or you both walk away from the situation amicably, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Then finally, you put the ball back in their court and it's like, but what are your thoughts on this? I'd love to hear from you. And that's very important because that goes from, here's why I'm right, here's why you're wrong, this is how the situation needs to be. Nobody likes to be dominated or controlled in that way. So we want to keep that conversation going. Otherwise, it becomes a monologue versus a dialogue, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so true. And, when you hear you say it like that, you're like, duh, of course that's what you should do, right? And then in the moment, you're just like, it all goes out the window. But it's actually a really good segue into another question I had for you, which is this idea of distinguishing facts from feelings. And I think it's really relevant here because we've picked at least a subject matter in a difficult conversation where oftentimes there's a lot of feelings that are involved, right? So talk a little bit about what you mean when you say distinguish facts from feelings in the context of communication.
Sure. And I'm so glad you asked that because you're right. That template, that statement sounds great. But
Doesn't
in the
it?
moment, yeah, it sounds great. Have I ever executed it perfectly? Absolutely not.
Right, exactly.
I try. But the key to it, you're right, is to go from feeling so angry, insecure, worried, anxious, whatever it is in that moment, that feeling, to calming myself down, getting to a place of very confident, self-assurance, calm. Then it's easier to have that conversation. So how do you go from feeling some type of way to the facts? Especially for agentpreneurs, often when we are feeling agitated, scarcity mindset, worried we won't be able to lock in the deal, which means we won't be able to pay our bills, which means we're going to go into more debt, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
That story is often what's playing in the back of your mind, which is what's causing the true anxiety. It's not just the thing ever, meaning it's not just the transaction, it's not just the client. They say if it's hysterical, it's historical. And what that means is if you have a very big reaction to something that seems very small, like a client sent you a text message that wasn't that mean, but you had such a hysterical reaction over it, it's because historically something's been brewing underneath the surface for you for a while now.
I love that. It's a great saying. So it's so true.
Yeah, or when, again, we go back to kind of personal relationships, like use marriages because that's kind of the easiest one for people to relate to. But your spouse says something like, hey, honey, did you take out the trash? And you're like, oh, what? I have to take out the trash again? Like you just have this horrible reaction to it, right? And they're like, I just asked if you did. truthfully, it had nothing to do with the trash in the moment. If I really analyze it, historically, things have been happening over the past week, months. Maybe you've just been building up resentment, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back, right?
Yeah.
So you as a leader, as an entrepreneur, have to recognize, okay, these are my feelings. Then step two, whenever I notice I'm feeling that way, I take a deep breath and I'm like, okay, but what are the facts about this situation? Is it really true that my spouse is a horrible person and hates me? Probably not. That was just a thought that you had. Is it true that my client really does want to leave me and they're not going to push this transaction through? No, they just text you in this moment. So, in order to talk yourself off the ledge, you literally have to go with just the straight facts. What exactly happened right now? No interpretation, no stories, no assumptions. But what are the actual facts? Well, the fact is your client did reach out to you and communicate with you. At least they're communicating with you as soon as they can to let you know about the situation. The title rep did actually contact you about that, but they did contact you late. But at least they contacted you, right? So it could be worse. And so that's what I mean is you do have to look at just the facts because often our biases, our stories, whatever feeling we have in that day from other things will start to meld and mold the stories we tell ourselves. And when you cannot separate from the emotions that have built up throughout the day from other things and the facts of this moment, it's going to be very difficult for you to treat this transaction with this client separately from everything else that's happening in your life. Things with your kids, things with your spouse. And so this exercise of facts versus feelings is very important. So step one, take the deep breath in and say, okay,
Yep.
Kamille, if it's hysterical, it's historical. So I got hysterical over that situation. There must be something historically that has been happening the past couple of weeks. And then the second is asking myself, okay, what is the facts though about the situation right now? And then that's the easiest way to go from overwhelmed feelings to just the facts of how we need to deal with this right now and problem solve.
Perfect. I'm gonna use this next time, Kamille. Okay, I promise you. Next time I'm in this situation, I'm gonna use this playbook, and it's gonna work perfectly every single time. Well, I know it will work. That's the thing. The challenge is actually doing it, and I think you're right. I'm someone who's like quick to just try to like fix things, right? A friend of mine years ago made this video that went super viral, and it was called "It's Not About the Nail." I don't know if you ever saw it.
Oh
And
yeah, I
it,
love that video.
yeah, it's a great video, right? For those of you who haven't seen it, we'll link to it just because it's fun. And it's this woman, and she's got like a nail, literally a nail in her head, and she's like, I'm just struggling. Like all my sweaters are snagged. It's the best line in the whole thing. And he's like, but you've got a nail, and she's like, stop. And she just wanted him to listen, right? At the end of the day, and she just wanted him to say, that must be really tough, you know. And so it just this is good advice. This is good advice for 2021. Take a deep breath. I'm going to try to do that, not jump to some solution or the answer and just say, take a deep breath and follow that formula because I think it's a good one. Which brings me to my last question for you today, Kamille. And I think all of these things, of course, are related. It is, what do you mean when you say that there's three sides to every story, right? And it's kind of provocative, right? Because, people, we always think, well, there's two sides to every story. But maybe there's actually three sides to every story. What does that mean?
So this is something my grandmother used to tell me growing up. And she would say, oh, there's three sides to every story. And this would come up when my cousins and I would get in a little argument or a fight. Both of us would come running into the house crying. And then, each one of us points the finger. Oh, it was his fault. It was her fault. She pushed me. She did this. And the story would go on and on. My grandmother would sit both of us down. She would never take a side. She would never say Camille's right or Ryan's right. She'd always say, okay, let me hear you out. She'd hear me out. And she'd be like, okay, let me hear you out, Ryan out. And from both of our stories, she usually extracted the exact truth. And usually it was both of us contributed to that very chaotic situation. And we
Yeah.
both needed to apologize. And so she said, remember, there's always three sides to a story. There's yours, there's theirs, and then there's the truth. And the truth often is a combination of something between those two stories. Now, does
Yeah.
it mean that what you're saying is a lie and what they're saying is a lie? No. But as a leader, this is where you have to step into my grandmother's shoes. Unfortunately for you all, you have to actually kind of put your feelings aside sometimes because it's your job to lead people forward into the solution, lead the organization forward into a solution, lead your client forward into a solution. And so the three sides to every story is about knowing what your perspective is, knowing what your client's perspective is, and then figuring out, okay, what is the thing though that has contributed to both perspectives? Maybe I didn't communicate well enough to them. Maybe I need to switch up the way that I explain things. Maybe the escrow or the title dropped the ball somewhere, so I need to work with somebody different who can explain things better, et cetera, et cetera. So instead of trying to prove yourself right and them wrong, or let them be right and then you're always wrong, so you're always the guilty party, because some people
Yeah.
do that too. That's another type of story we all play. It's your job to take both and extract what the truth is. Now, that's why it's called three sides to every story, because especially when you're emotionally invested in that situation, pride gets in the way, insecurity gets in the way. It's like we really want to be the one that's right, but it's not about proving right or wrong. It's about finding the right solution half the time. So, to be honest, the three sides to every story requires a great amount of humility, because there's going to be times where you're going to have to put your pride aside, just like that situation, right? I didn't want to say my cousin Ryan was right because he probably, I probably did nitpick or say something to him that triggered why we got in a little fight. But that's the truth. And so my grandmother was able to extract from both of us, well, how do we actually move this forward? So that's my suggestion to you, is the next time you're getting lost in the confusion of, well, no, I didn't do anything wrong. Or, yeah, I probably messed up everything. Like that doesn't solve anything. What we want to do is sit back, look at both sides and figure out, okay, well, what is the truth of this, and be as objective as possible. So that's my challenge to you, is next time you're in a tough situation with a client, with a spouse, with a friend, and you find yourself spending way too much energy and time trying to prove your point, right? Go into that third position and say, okay, well, what is the actual truth from both of our arguments? What are we both
Yeah.
trying to say? And a
Yeah.
funny little aside, I had this joke with my husband that one day we're going to start a podcast called Arguing the Same Point. Um, because often we find ourselves debating on something and we actually have the exact same intention. We both
Hmm.
want the same thing, but we have totally different ways in which we think that needs to happen. But when you look at our intention at the end of the day, our value system, what we want for community, for society, for people, it's the same. We have the same point, but we are just coming from very different perspectives. But if you can focus on that point, that value system, it's like, hey, we want this for the client. We want this for your transaction. If you can keep your focus there, that's that truth, that third piece to the story that I want you to stay focused on.
Beautifully said, Kamille. I love that. And I love this topic, Kamille, because communication is everything. And I feel like
Yeah.
9 out of 10 problems that I see are due to some breakdown or failure in communication. You over communicate, you under communicate, whatever, right? Like
Mhm.
this feels like one of the building blocks of everything in our lives and every relationship that we have and every high performing organization, right? It just, communication is everything. Kamille, thank you for spending more of your time here with me today and for with all of our agentpreneurs out there. These messages are amazing and wonderful, and I know that they're finding a lot of value in them.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Thank you for having me again, Randy. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We're going to have you back on officially one more time, but unofficially, I'm going to call you.
I'm
And
here for that.
our actually maybe there's two more. I'm messing this up, but I know we're going to talk about defeating these overwhelming feelings of stress. And
Yeah.
by the way, every time I try to pronounce the word overwhelming, I mess it up. Um, and staying focused by engaging with clarity. So maybe there's a
Mm.
couple more coming up, but
Yes,
exciting.
sir.
Thank you, Kamille. Happy New Year to you. All the best to you and your family and your business and all the things that matter to you.
I
And
received
just
that.
thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, agentpreneurs. We'll talk soon.
All right, agentpreneurs, there you have it. First recorded episode of 2021. Super excited. This is a foundational, fundamental topic that you all have to watch and share because communication is everything. And I think there were a lot of really great practical tips. The thing that I love, because it just echoes what I've been talking about forever on this show, is be yourself, be authentic. People will see through it, and It won't end well if you're anybody other than yourself, I promise you. And I love this be more interested than interesting. And that's something that a lot of people struggle with. You know, in user research, one of the things that we talk about when I train people is don't fill the silence, right? You're not supposed to talk, you're supposed to wait for them to talk. And it's a difficult thing to do, but I think if you apply it here, people just want to talk, right? But if you have a little bit of silence, it gives the other person a chance to say something. So give them a chance to talk and be interested in what they're saying. I love that. Anyways, that's it for today. Of course, if you're still here with us, please subscribe to this channel. 2021, I'm still a terrible YouTuber. I never remind you guys to subscribe, but hopefully you're doing it anyways. And definitely check out and subscribe to all of Kamille's stuff for all of this great information. So that's it. Happy 2021. Until tomorrow, be safe, be healthy, be happy. Work on your communication. We all need to, and we'll see you soon. Bye.